What if your body was telling you something your mind hadn't yet understood? What if illness wasn't failure but permission to reconcile with the parts of yourself you'd been missing? Welcome to Unpolished Wisdom, a space for conversations that are beautifully imperfect, raw, unfinished, and deeply human. I'm Dr. Katrina Gisbert-Tay, a medical doctor and executive well-being coach. Through my work, I help people navigate transitions with honesty, courage, and compassion. And today we sit with my dear friend, Jessica Nomi Spain, a nutritionist, health coach, and mother of four who spent decades living without knowing her origins. Adopted at 4 years old after her Korean mother's death, Nomi built a life, a faith, a family, and a thriving health practice, all while carrying a quiet ache for belonging. Then a few years ago, a DNA test changed everything. She discovered that the family she thought had abandoned her had been searching for her all along. This is a conversation about what it means to come home to yourself, not just emotionally, but physically, spiritually, and somatically, about how our bodies hold our stories and how finding our roots can free us in ways we never imagined. Welcome, Nomi, and thank you for being here.
Good morning. Hello.
Hello, I'm so happy to have you. And what time is it in Israel you're joining us?
7 a.m. It's
Oh my
late for me. I get
goodness.
up early.
Yes, I know. You're like a 5 a.m. riser, right?
Oh, ideally. That's the best. That's my favorite hour is that 5 to 6 a.m.
I love that. So I know I gave a little bit of an introduction to you and the shifts and the changes that you've made. And as I mentioned, adopted at 4 years old, right? Your mom committed suicide. Did I get that right?
Yeah, she had postpartum depression after that really at that age wasn't at that point wasn't recognized.
Yeah, that's right. And your dad gave you and your brother up for adoption. I mean, growing up, what was that like? Just not knowing where you were from.
So I think one of the things that happens with childhood trauma, especially when it happens at such a young age, it's your normal. So I actually used to walk around. I remember being in kindergarten and telling kids that, yeah, my dad couldn't take care of me and he wanted to get remarried. So he put me and my brother up for adoption. And it wasn't said in an emotional way, it was said in kind of a matter of fact way. It was part of what I'd been told. It was not something that felt like it was even a secret, you know? There were definitely secrets. At that age, I didn't know how my mother had passed away. Um, but I definitely just kind of went along with this is normal. And you become that kid that is really easy to be transitioning in different homes. I with foster family prior to being adopted. And I was used to just flexible and making the best of the situation at a very young age.
Yeah. And what were the narratives that you made up, the stories you made up about it? Because there must have been something, right? As a kid, there must have been a narrative going around for you to understand what went on.
So the story, I think that I mean, I've talked to other adoptees and there's, you're kind of given this idea that you're chosen, right? So that's how you explain the relationship with the adopted family and, making it special and unique. And so I would say that my natural tendency is somebody who's very positive. And my mother's English name is Joy. And prior to her death, like she was also considered what I later learned just to be like a very positive, upbeat person. And so I think that my natural tendency as a personality is just to sort of optimistic. But the story that I made up was really that this was the best situation. I kind of accepted that was how it was presented to me, that this was the best situation, that I got to stay with, adopted with my biological brother, who I'm very close with, so that I got to stay with him. And this was just the best situation. And I went along with that. I really never questioned it. It doesn't mean that it didn't come outside in my teenage years. There was definitely rebellion and there was definitely an internal sort of what's bigger than me? What am I part of? I think a lot of that has actually led to my spiritual world and developing that and my religious conversion to Judaism. But for the most part, it's sort of acceptance, at least surface level.
Yeah. And so, okay, let's backtrack a bit. I wanna talk about the conversion to Judaism, but in a little bit. But I wanted to go into how did this narrative and not knowing your origins shape the way you saw the world, the way you viewed the world, if any?
So I always knew that I was half Korean, but I had no access to, at this time in the 80s, I think maybe it's different today. There wasn't any um, information, or like I didn't have a lot of cultural information. I didn't know what it meant to be Korean. I knew that there was two other kids in my class and they were both adopted and we were often kind of grouped together. I had one Korean friend also adopted and I used to hang out with her a lot. We're still in touch today, thanks to social media. I think that on some level it felt different. Both of my parents are from the West, light hair, blue eyed, and I didn't see a lot of cultural representation that looked like me. And at the same time, I'm half Korean, so I blended in enough. But I think that the idea was more that I don't think I really felt ever like I belonged, but I also wasn't able to articulate, do I belong? So it was more just like this deep sense of like, where do I fit? And that made me super easygoing because I was always willing to kind of fit somewhere. But I think that what it did for me was it gave me also like an opening to sort of say later, which it took years, who am I and where do I really want to be and how do I really want to define myself? Because I didn't have all of these boundaries and definitions. Like this is my family, this is my story of origin, and this is the culture that we have. So yeah.
Yeah. So it's really impacted the part that you played in the world, which is that I need to fit in. I need to
Oh,
find, yeah, I have to find a way to fit in so that I will belong somewhere. And so, did I get that
I
right?
think 100%. I actually think my most distinct feeling from like uh, maybe elementary school or high school, or if I go all the way back, junior high, I just never felt comfortable and like I belonged. And I think that on some level, that's what every teenager goes through. And then for me, it was also, I didn't have a space that I went to and belonged. And I have an amazing adopted family, and my extended adopted family was amazing. My cousins and my aunts and uncles on both sides of my family. But maybe you go to school as a teenager and you don't feel like you belong because that's part of adolescence and autonomy and becoming yourself. But then you go home to your family, space where you feel kind of home and settled. I don't think I really ever had that settled feeling. And I don't even think I even knew that I didn't have that settled feeling until Korean family much, much later. Then all of a sudden, oh, this is how other people feel. There was like something internally that clicked.
So, yeah, so let's jump into that, which is getting into the Jewish faith, your conversion at 20, you converted into the Jewish faith and you eventually became an Orthodox Jew. And you've mentioned to me because just for those who are listening, so Nomi and I went to Duke together many moons ago, and that's how we first met and became classmates and roommates, right, for a while.
Yes, some good
Um,
picture.
exactly. And you've said that Judaism is a home you chose before you found the home you came from. So I'm curious, what drew you to the community and the faith?
Yeah, so I think that sense of not belonging meant that from an early age, I was looking for connection. And I definitely caught glimpses of it where I felt like, oh, this feels good. This feels like something that I energetically connect to, even if I can't explain it. And I'm really big into that, right? Like I'm not into overthinking, and I'm really big into that instinct of like, okay, I'm really feeling into this. And so when I was in high school, actually, I had a hard time with my adopted family. I was going through a lot emotionally, and I ended up actually and moving in with a good friend of mine, her family. It was a Jewish family. And I got my first exposure to inside Judaism. Plenty of Jewish friends growing up. But this was the first time I was kind of seeing home inside. The grandmother was a Holocaust survivor, and she used to light candles on Friday night, which is Jewish tradition, and they would do a meal together. I saw a lot of the custom, and I liked it. And it stuck with me as something that was warm, and I wouldn't be, was it familiar at that point? I don't think so, but it just felt really receptive. And so after that, I actually went to college. I went to the University of Minnesota and ended up actually getting offered a modeling job in Hong Kong. So I hop on a plane thinking I'll be back next semester. And I go to Hong Kong, and what could have been 1 month, 1 month or 3 months of work turned into a year. And I was doing commercials all over Asia and print and television. And it was great. And I was having fun. And this was my first exposure really to like Asian culture because I finally had in the Hong Kong community. I was eating at authentic, Asian restaurants. There's a little Pearl Vietnamese Hong Kong. You walk up these stairs and you go up, and it looks like it's not going to be anything special, but it was just this place everybody knew. And I had all these finally got this cultural experience. A girl from Minnesota, very Midwestern, Middle America, going to the lake and boating and doing riding my bike in the afternoon after school, very solid Midwestern upbringing. All of a sudden, I'm in like glamorous Hong Kong, sitting in a fancy club, and somebody's like, "Oh yeah, over there is John Paul Gaultier." I was like, "Really?" I didn't even know who that was. So um, during that period, I also made some friends in the Jewish community there in Hong Kong, and that was just again my social group. It just felt familiar. It was I could talk about them with cousins that I had because I'd grown up with Jewish friends. And one of the things is I was friends with this guy, and I remember saying to him, "You know, I'm gonna convert one day." And then I remember thinking, "That sounds so silly. He's gonna think I'm hitting on him, or like I sound so eager." But it just kind of popped up in my mouth in the conversation, and it felt right.
Yeah.
And eventually, spoiler alert, I end up marrying this guy. I was not hitting on him at the time.
So he knew it. He knew.
And so we ended up being friends for quite a while. And then eventually he asked me on a date. We went on a date and we discussed this whole thing like, being Jewish was part of, he had grown up traditional and it was important to him. And I really understood it, right? In terms of just the familiarity. I liked the custom. I liked the custom of Shabbat, like being sort of powering down and this connection time for 25 hours from Friday night to Saturday night. And I started reading more and more. I started reading. I started going to the synagogue and talking to the rabbi. And it felt like something that just felt really right for me. And I kind of jumped in. And the rabbis really want to be Jewish, go to a really like flourishing community. And so I moved to Los Angeles. And that was actually where I did my conversion. It took a full year and a half, complete change. It was a change of my job, the way that I dressed. And I will say now, at that time, it what I needed as somebody who felt like she was kind of floating through life and didn't have a space and belonging. I basically walked into a community that thankfully accepted me and gave me a framework that I could grow on a spiritual and emotional level. I was immature at that point. I was 20 years old when I started. And at the same time, it's something that's dynamic through the that relationship with myself. Judaism is not static. It's not like I just plugged into one way of Orthodox living and that's what it looks like. So it really gave me a space to feel like I could grow spiritually, and it gave me a lot of tools.
Yeah. So it gave you a lot of tools. You grew spiritually. It gave you a place to belong. But was there anything else that you felt was still missing? I'm curious.
So the truth is, when I clicked into this Orthodox way of living, I very much like 100% embraced everything. And I think that was part of like the chameleon effort to really become part of the community. And I actually 100% shut down parts of myself. People used to say, "Oh, you're adopted. Do you ever feel like you want to find your family?" And I would be like, "No, everything's great." Like that was like through my 20s and 30s. I feel like that was pretty much how I felt. Like, no, everything's fine. Like, I was, within a couple of years, I had a son, and then 2 years later, another son, and then 3 years later, another son, and then like, I started having my boys, and I was busy, and I felt like I've got everything. I say now, looking back, that I got married and had kids at 22, my first son at 23, not because I really wanted to be a wife and a mother at 22, 23, but because I really needed a family. And adoptive family's amazing, but there was something definitely that I was felt like I was lacking and subconsciously pulled me to a lifestyle that at a very young age, I needed a family and I got into a community. And I only recognized later back, oh, wow, this is where I've been trying to come to all along. So I actually went through my 20s and 30s not questioning anything. I had a friend who was adopted. She was trying to find her biological family, and I watched when she found them, her go through tremendous changes. And I looked at her and I'm like, I'm not ready for that. Like, what's going to happen? And she also received news, I think, that was really shocking to her. So for me, I had found out that my mother had passed when I was 18. My adoptive parents had told me. And so I didn't know, like, is it else that's kind of shocking and emotionally like takes me to another space, a mother and a wife, family that I'm holding together. I have time to focus on me. I really have time emotionally to dive into this whole story and what could come because it's so
Yeah.
unknown. So I put it off for many years. And eventually somebody moved into our community in Israel and her last name was Cho. And I knew my mother's name, her family
Organically.
name was Cho. And she also had converted. And this is when I got more curious because I finally had somebody like, she had said, maybe my mother, her father and my mother had moved to America around the same time. We thought maybe there was some crossover. We were joking, like maybe we're cousins, Cho is such a common last name. And she suggested to me, do a DNA test.
And this is
And that,
recently, right? This was only a few years ago.
yeah, she gave me the DNA test in like 2022. And I put it to the side. It was sitting on a shelf in my office for at least a year. And then in 2020, I went to America for work. And I said, you know what? I'll take that DNA test. And while I'm there, I'll drop the mailbox with the concierge at the hotel. Because why not? I was looking to actually confirm. I knew that I was half Korean, pictures of my mother, and me and my brother with our family. And I knew that I had family. I wasn't looking for family at that point. I actually was still looking for more belonging within the Jewish community. What do I mean by that? I thought maybe in my non-Korean side, I'd find out that there's like Jewish blood. That I'd find out like, oh, there's like Ashkenazi Jewish genes, and that would explain my spiritual tie. Like I was looking for scientific information that would explain my spiritual relationship and my draw to the community. So I submit my DNA test. And it comes back 2 weeks later. I'm sitting at work. I open up my email, DNA 23, and me says, you've got connections. Great. So I open it up. And on my father's side, I see tons of fourth cousins. By the way, we're probably also cousins. Like it was just tons of people that distant relations. I was like, okay, close that down. I open up on my mother's side and I see that I have two first cousins. So I'm like, wait, and they're coming from two different people. I see the little tree. So it says they're open to connection. Right away, I text the Jennifer, my cousin Jennifer. I thought she's the girl. I'll start with her. Also my cousin Stanley was on there, and she responds within a matter of hours. She's like, "Wait, do you have a brother named Justin?" Which is my brother's name. And within a few hours, I was on the phone with my father, who's my mother's youngest brother. And within 48 hours, I was on a Zoom call my cousins, with my aunts and uncles, like everybody was together and so like, oh my God, we found you. I can't believe it happened. And it wasn't what I was expecting. It was also the best thing ever because I had spent, years being very afraid to ask questions because I was afraid of the answers. And I was also trying so hard always to like hold everything together and be like exactly what I thought I should be. As an Orthodox Jewish woman, when you do a conversion, like my life changed dramatically and I embraced that change. And at the same time, so much of myself to sort of fit into what I thought the ideological best version of being an Orthodox Jewish woman. And then all of a sudden, I've got all of this data and input, like family. And they're saying, you look like your mother. And, you remind us of ways. And I'm with my Amy, like we have this, I feel like me and Amy have a similar sense of humor. And my mother worked in a jewelry shop and I have a little bit of like an obsession with jewelry.
Yes, I know.
That, yeah. Little things like that felt so affirming. What I had always felt like I was kind of a easygoing tendency towards people pleasing person because I'd been through trauma. So I thought my whole personality was shaped by trauma. Like this is how a child responds
Yeah.
in a good way. Like I was considered adaptive. And when I met my family, I realized like, no, my best trait are not out of this trauma story. Actually, they're traits that come from my family. They're traits that my uncle and say that I share with my mother. They're traits that I see in my cousins. And that was so validating and affirming because in my whole life, I thought my mother was, when I learned of her story, just little bits I knew from the age of 18 on, or the things that I remembered as a child hearing, I had put her as this idea that she was an immigrant. She had a really hard life. She died in this horrible way because she was so oppressed. And what I learned was actually my mother was so hardworking. She had brought her brother and brothers, her 3 brothers and sister over, and her mother over from Korea after in the 70s,
Yeah.
in a better life, to be very successful and to have kids. And they stayed close as a family. I have a whole bunch of cousins. And so immediately I was like, meet these people. Like there was such a warm reception on set. We have to meet in person. Within like a month and a half, I flew to Los Angeles where my family was living. My cousins that lived out of state or in different parts of California also flew in with their kids. And we had a family reunion.
Yeah.
And
That's so
it
amazing.
and it was, I felt like the best adoption story because there was such a warm reception and there was such an immediate connection and comfort that I'd never experienced with people, like just kind of settling in and just feeling like so comfortable and together.
Okay, so like I teared up when you shared that story. I could feel how much it meant to you. Really, just like finding your family, your origin story, and realizing I'm not alone. So, could you tell me a little bit more about that moment? Because I felt the emotions from you too, right? That moment when you said, within a few hours, I was on with my cousin, then I spoke to my uncle, and within 48 hours, I was on a Zoom with this whole family. And what was that like?
It brought so much positive energy into my life. It
Yeah.
felt like, especially because I think, my weak spot throughout life, even
Mm,
in the Jewish community, is I'm so sensitive to rejection.
mm,
And so all of a sudden, without any explanation, there was just acceptance and like, we want to see you, we want to be with you. And internally, I felt a settling. Like I felt something kind of just like, oh, and then I was like, "Oh, this is how other people feel all the time probably." But I didn't realize that I didn't feel like that. Like all my life I thought I was super high functioning. I was doing great. I was doing everything. But then when I had this, I was like, "Oh, I just settled into something." Like it felt, I think, just kind of like a whole relaxation of my nervous system.
oh my gosh. That
There's
that
there's
sounds amazing, by the way. And what's so
yeah,
interesting for me, just the contrast of you didn't even know it was something was missing. You didn't know didn't know there's anything wrong, so to speak. Like there was anything missing
I
there.
wasn't seeking this state. And all of a sudden, I was in this new state of just feeling kind of like calm and settled. It gave me a little bit more confidence, I think, also. I would say that on some level, I feel like I've earned my way into every space I've been in. And what I mean by that is I spent 2.5 years, 2 to 2.5 years with a foster family prior to my adoption. And then when I was adopted, you're the good girl as much as you can be. You're in a new situation. And then I earned my way into the Jewish community, through my conversion, through being like the perfect Orthodox Jewish woman. And all of a sudden, here was a space I didn't have to earn myself into. They were like, "Oh, we've been waiting for you. When Facebook came out, we were looking for you." The problem was that my father, when my mother had passed away, my father had, I guess he just left. My grandmother had taken care of me as a baby. My mother was close with her siblings. They were very close.
Mm,
They together in Korea, they were close. They worked together when they all came to America. When my mother brought them over, they worked together in sewing. Then they pooled their money. They bought a house together. They bought a convenience store together. They were a close family that was working as a team. And when my mother married my father, that shifted a bit. It was definitely like a different dynamic. And then when my mother passed away, my father just took us from California back to his home state of Minnesota, and he didn't tell anybody where he'd taken us. So they'd been looking for me under my father's name. And my uncle actually said, I got on the phone with my uncle Eddie. He said to me, "How's your father?" I said, "I don't know. I don't talk to him." and they told me that they'd been looking for me when Facebook opened under his name, and they had no idea that I adopted. And
They,
they told me, taking care of you. Like, they were a close family, and it was the 8 there was no or way of finding. At one point, they'd hired a leader that turned out, I think my uncle said it had turned out to be kind of a scam. And it's just amazing that they were already on the DNA. My cousins were. So it's just like so easy. And all of a sudden, within like my whole life went from this to like just flipped over, in the best possible way.
oh no, totally. But I mean, I'd love to hear what you think about this, which is perhaps you didn't do that DNA test earlier, because was it maybe because you weren't ready?
Oh, 100%. 100%. I think that there's a level of emotional integration that you need that comes as you become an adult, right? Like your ability to hold the gray area and your ability to sit with comfort of whatever might come. And I was really, number one, scared. And also, I was scared of what I could find, right? Like, you could find a family that doesn't want you. I could experience rejection all over again. That would have also been painful for me. And so my friend actually started going and looking for her family, and I saw her going through all these changes and the emotional things that she was dealing with. I wouldn't put myself in therapy because I'm like, if I'm ever gonna actually find my family, I need to do a lot of foundational work on myself. I spent years in therapy before I actually found my family. So I think that I was definitely not ready. My facade was like, I don't need it. And of course, I needed it, but subconsciously, that was like a subconscious need. It wasn't something I was willing to like say I needed. Um, and it came at the right timing.
So I want to go back a little bit to the trauma you mentioned, right? And in a way, you said, right, that this trauma, the experiences you've had have shaped you into becoming people pleasing, you'll adapt easily. But now you've shifted your story so dramatically. With that
Totally.
one event, you've shifted your story.
Yeah.
And I want to know now, what's the new story of Jessica?
Wow. I haven't, that's a great question. I think that I realized that my hard working is not this overachieving compensating for earning my way into spaces. It's a quality that my mother had, and it's a quality that my family members, my uncles and aunt have. Um, and I like that. I'm really proud to carry that trait forward. And the other shift is that I really feel that my positive optimistic is not like this whitewashing sort of ability to try to like Pollyanna myself because I've been through so much. So I just like dose myself with optimism. It's really a part of like my growing up. It was the way that my mother was. I think that's also why it was such a, the way that she passed was so shocking to everybody because she really, it was a most likely a hormonal imbalance. It was a physiological shift. It was not it's like her a depressive personality. And I think that understanding I even went into health on some level to really understand because initially when I went to health, I actually went into neuroscience. I was doing a course at Duke on neuroscience because I just wanted to understand the brain and personality and motivation and all of that. And I think what's very interesting is that something's always calling you home. If you listen, you will find your way back. That is what I've learned.
No, I
I
love
am
that. I love that.
surprised I am so surprised that at 20, I chose the same like, I would say that the Jewish community and the Korean community have so many overlapping family values, work ethic values, and I think that I was consciously seeking the things that I would have gotten from had I been raised with my Korean family, and that's not to credit my adoptive family because they gave me also, I always look at my kids and my kids are who they are because of my parents' parenting skills, like my parents my kids are great. I got a little brag. But I had, great parenting from my adoptive family, and we're close, and they're really a big part of our lives and my kids' life. But I also think I crave certain things that I got in the Jewish community. I met my family, they're so similar, especially the family connection, the priority of family, and the work ethic.
No, for sure. And how has that this knowledge, the Korean culture and the Korean family, how has that impacted your faith, if any, or your participation in the community?
So I think that what it really did was the nice thing about in Judaism, there's an expression, Shavim Panim LeTorah, which means 70 faces of Torah, which is the Old Testament, right? And it really is this idea that it's the Old Testament and its interpretations. So there's this idea that there's so many interpretations to Judaism. And I think meeting my family and finding out all that I found out and even experiencing all of the emotions that I went through, that settling feeling really gave me the ability to say, I'm gonna good for me. I spent so many years very much like seeking the letter of the law from one external source. And over the last couple of years, I really kind of settled into myself and I'm more I always say, like on some level my life is now because like there's just so much that's happened in the last couple of years. Like my life isn't this nice package. Like I wake up and I have my schedule and then I put my kids to bed after reading them a story. And like life looked a lot tidier in my 20s and 30s. And it was highly controlled. Like I made it look that tidy. I was a very scheduled, regimented person. I would get up every morning at the exact same time. I would go for my run, the exact same run. I would come home, I would eat my breakfast, I would take the kids. Like I was super organized and regimented, a lot more flow. It's a lot more organic. It's so messy, but I've never felt more comfortable or settled in myself than I do now. And the great thing is when you feel like that and you wake up every single day feeling that level of like just contentment, right? Because it's not that dopamine high of like thrill. It's not. It's like this internal contentment every single day you get to look forward to.
No, totally. And the word that comes up for me is permission.
Yeah.
It's that permission
Percent.
to be, the permission to not be perfect, the permission to not have to be seen a certain way. And it's not permission from others, it's from you.
Oh, I was the only one never giving myself permission, right? Like I I interpreted what I should be, and then I put it in, this is how it's gonna look. And yeah, permission is a huge idea of like just being able to like say to myself, like, this is where I am, and I'm so okay with that.
And that's so interesting because as we're speaking, what's coming up for me is, and I literally just thought of this now, but that permission, the permission for you to accept yourself, interestingly, was your pathway to belonging.
100%. But you know what? I think over the years, I've done a lot of like Carl Jung and shadow work.
Mhm.
And I always, I said earlier, like I'm really sensitive to rejection, but I learned also that really I was the one who had rejected myself. So every single time that there was an external rejection or there was something that I interpreted as rejection, it hurt so bad. But I had rejected so many parts of myself and I had to go and reclaim them. And once I stopped rejecting parts of myself, whether it was my personality or it was just parts of my story, um, there was I'm not prone to that feeling of rejection anymore. It doesn't affect me. I don't think I would even notice it. I'm at home with myself.
No. And what's interesting, and you've shared this with me, was that after you gave yourself that permission, you took the DNA test, you met your family, then you got really sick quite recently.
Yeah. Right. That was a huge that's in the theme of like the last a bit year and a bit. So I met my family in 2023 and we stayed in touch. In 2024, I actually me and my husband and all of my kids went in with my adoptive family and my brother, and all of my cousins and their kids and my aunts and uncles again, and we had a nice family reunion. We had a great time. And I came home and a couple of weeks later, or about a month later, that I was having I don't connect the events. I connect the in Chinese medicine, there's the idea that the lungs hold grief. And did experience I definitely experienced it. I'm still sad to this day. When I see my cousins and my aunts and uncles, my aunt and uncles, there was grief for like, wow, I missed out on this beautiful family. And I have such appreciation for my adopted family and such appreciation for being raised with my brother. But there was grief for like, wow, I missed there's so much normal stuff going on here. Like it was a really normal life for them, you know? And here I was like kind of never feeling like I belonged. And so there was grief. And I basically came down with a very rare, what they still haven't 100% figured out what it is. It's an inflammatory lung reaction. I've had every test for this genetic, autoimmune, stool, parasite. They never really figured out what the cause was. But I had what's called eosinophilic pneumonia. And it's basically not pneumonia that you catch. It's not a bacteria that you catch. It's your body creating too much white blood cells and they were flooding my lungs. And so I was once I was an endurance runner. You know, I would get up and I'm running 5 o'clock in the morning, 20 kilometers for fun. I would go running. There was a relay race I did, that 300-kilometer relay race. That was part of, 50 kilometers through the night. We end up in the south of the country. And all of a sudden I couldn't even walk up my stairs. And the doctors kept telling me like, this is asthma. And I'm a clinical nutritionist and I'm sitting in the research. I'm doing my doctorate in clinical nutrition. And so I'm aware that obviously there's something wrong with my immune system. Even if I would develop asthma in my 40s, why is that? I'm sitting there trying to figure out what's going on. And at the same time, I'm getting every test under the sun, pulmonary tests, stress tests, maybe it's pulmonary embolism from all my travels. In the end, I went to the doctor and I said, if you don't put me in the emergency room, I think I'm gonna die before the weekend is up. And they ended up figuring out that I had this disorder. So that was a huge identity shift because I'm the healthy person, right? I'm the person that doesn't even take Tylenol. I don't take birth control. I don't have a plastic cup. My friend jokes when she came to my house, she's like, I needed to take yogurt with me, and you didn't even have a plastic spoon. I had to take a real spoon. Like I'm I've got all of these health habits that I've built in based on the research, based on what works for me and my family. And all of a sudden I'm being told I have this rare, unknown idiopathic lung disorder, and we're gonna have to throw you on all of the medication you've spent man for your. I became the patient I don't want to see because of polypharmacy
Yeah.
and way too much. And at the same time, I couldn't breathe. And so there was this whole space of like, when you can't breathe, the only thing that you can do is be present. I went into the hospital, I had a procedure, they cleaned out my lungs, they did a biopsy, sent me home, and they put me on steroids with and I was on an oxygen machine. And within a day or two, I started to feel already much better, like within 48 hours. And the first thought that I just had was like so much clarity of like, I really need to own my whole life. Like, where am I not in my life? Like, where am I still hiding? Where am I up? And it was just so settling because when you say like being that sick and having my identity was health,
Yeah.
and I'm still, and it still is. But being that sick gave me permission to say, okay, in terms of my spiritual relationship, like what's going on there? Where am I not showing up? What do I want to do? What do I not want to do? Right. In terms of like personal relationships, what do I need to shift there? I don't think that I'm always the kind of person, I'm going to do what's good I'm going to look at the whole situation. And I always think the word of Trump is you sense everybody else before you sense your own. Being that sick and not being able to breathe, the only option was to feel. I became really sensitive to other energy. When people would visit me when I was sick, like I could feel like, oh, this is a friendship that gives me energy. Because I have a ton of friends, so grateful, I have an amazing community. And then there was friendships where I'm like, oh, this is really draining. And I could not sense it before when I was healthy. I could only sense it. My barometer I became very sensitive to energy. And so then it was like also, how do I carry this forward? What do I say more yes? What do I say more no's to? And that has been the theme of the last year.
Wow. That's amazing that actually, and both of us we're brainiacs, right? We like to study and do more certifications
That's
and
my
do
life.
more studying and learn more and take in more information. But I just find it amazing how you've just demonstrated and shared with us how much wisdom your body holds.
Oh, 100%. There's it's there if we listen to it. Life is often too busy, and if you're a chronic, responsible, and responsive woman, we can oftentimes not hear that conversation that's happening inside our body or what our body's trying to tell us. And I think that's my biggest thing is being that ill, not being able to walk even just more than a few steps. Like that's how bad it got to before I went to the hospital. Um, that all of a sudden it's like I really felt what I needed because the only thing I could be with was just with myself and hearing that conversation. And as much as, for me, like the medications that I had to go on were just, I was just, there are things that you don't want to put people on. But at the time, I wouldn't take back getting sick because it gave me I felt like I skipped ahead a few steps in terms of just understanding myself. What work would have taken me a couple of years, more therapy, uh, became very clear
Yeah, there's a jump.
within
It allowed you to
months.
jump into a different way of being completely.
Totally.
Oh. So you've said something to me that I find incredibly, incredibly powerful, that finding your origins didn't fix you, it freed you. And that you no longer feel like you need to be repaired. So right now, being more at home in your body, being able to sense the energies and being present with yourself, what does that freedom feel like? And how did it change the way you move through life?
So I think that the first thing that comes to mind, I'm actually seeing like this, there's less like gripping onto things, onto ideas, onto like, this is how it has to be. On some level, I would say there's less striving, right? I'm still a high achiever. I still have my goals, but there's less emotion tied into it. Like I'm there, I'm putting the work in, but there's less of that, like, I need to do this. So there's definitely less of that, like gripping on to like, this is how it has to look. I feel this level of ability to be creative and flexible and just sort of go along with it. I trust myself 100%. I think also finding my family and having it be the best case scenario, right? Because really, I think this is the best case adoption scenario. Um, and then also getting sick and the best scenario being that I had like all of these sort of self realizations and it didn't pull me down. I feel like, oh my gosh, my health and I was able to regain my health and I feel great. But it really allowed me just to go towards this space of and I really hesitate to use the word like surrender.
Yeah.
There's two words I always hesitate to use: surrender and inner child. Like I had like a little bit of like me to them, you know? So when it comes to surrender, I feel like there's so many words that I just think they have so much trauma, surrender. There's like whole vocabulary around that's in our regular language today. So I don't want to be cliche, but I do totally feel like I'm open. Like what comes and what happens, I've seen evidence has demonstrated that I'm capable of handling it. I've also seen that it really does turn out when you get to the end of the story. It really does turn out well, and so I can trust that like that's the energy that I can depend on. I do believe that. It takes time sometimes. But yeah, there's more surrender.
Oh, I love that. So what does it mean for you now if you were to be in the messy middle again?
Oh, it's the best part of life, first of all.
Yeah, definitely.
I like myself more than I ever did in my 20s and 30s.
Mhm. Me too.
And yeah, and also like the cool thing about liking yourself more in your 40s than in your 20s and 30s is you're like, "Oh my gosh, and it's going to keep getting better. I'm going to like myself even more in my 50s." And so I love that energy in my life. I love that relationship with myself. I love that internal dialogue of I it sounds so cheesy, but like I really enjoy my own energy. So I've traveled alone in my 40s. I'll buy 2 tickets to a concert, but then if it just doesn't work out for one of my friends to come, I'll be like, "Okay, I can go on my own." Like I enjoy my own energy. Um, but the messiness, if we think about creative types, right? They say they're more messy. So I think that the thing about the messy middle is it's the opportunity to like be creative with the rest of your life.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so I want to go to my last question, which is the question I ask all of my guests to close the show,
Mhm.
which is how would you hold space for your past self now, knowing what you know?
I definitely would have, if it was, I was in conversation with my past self, I would definitely say, listen to your inner voice, which I think sounds like so like cliched, right? But there were definitely things and questions and that I had in my 20s or things that were coming up that I put to the side. I was so focused on like this is what the path of life has to look like. I'm going to get married. I'm going to have kids. I'm going to be this level of perfect, and nobody's ever going to question my integrity or intention in regards to like my conversion or the Jewish community. And now when I look back, I'm more I have a lot of similarities to my 20-year-old self in terms of like energy that I bring. I feel young again in my 40s because I've also allowed myself to acknowledge like, no, these are the things that I need from myself. And this is how I want the next 10 or 20 years of my life to look. And this is how I'm going to work towards it. Goals and things that I put on the side. Sometimes I think, wow, if I stuck to that in my 20s, look at how far I'd be ahead today. So on some level, I would say to my younger self, like that voice thing you want to do, that you have, that intuition that you have coming up. Yeah, you are right. And in some ways, I did right. Like I feel like sometimes I'm like, I that intuition is what it just took me on a longer path. Had I listened to it really clearly, like maybe I would have found my family when I was living in Los Angeles 20 some years ago. Like, what you were here? Like you were like I was like around the corner. They were in Orange County, and so maybe had I listened, I would have found them earlier. And but at the same time, I got to this space energetically that I would have been at then. Does that make sense?
No, of course. And the another word coming up is rebirth. It feels a bit that the messy middle allowed you an opportunity to be born again and have this life and the family that you always wished for. But you had to get yourself through it, through the emotion and out of that emotional tunnel first.
Oh yeah, 20s and 30s was like labor. I think
Literally
I
and figuratively, yeah.
and there's huge expansion in your 40s, 50s, and 60s. You know, whenever I have a client, I say to them, I had a client yesterday, he was 48 years old. I'm like, "You're so young." He's like, "I am?" And I was like, "Yeah, you're really young." I really consider like 40, 50, 60. I always say like this is the way that I ran my life from like 20 to 40. I consider 0 to 20 my gestational age, 20 to 40 my childhood and adolescence, and like 40 on up is like adulthood. Like now I have all the skills and I know exactly how to listen to myself. But, 40, 50, 60, if you're taking good care of yourself and if you are energetically in tune with yourself, these can be 100% the most energetic, content years of our lives. And I'm looking forward to that.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Jessica, for being here. I so appreciate it. And I cried. Oh my goodness. And
Thank you for
thank you.
having me.
Thank you for that. Thank you for joining us for this conversation with Jessica Nomi Spain. If this episode spoke to you, follow the show and share it with someone who's searching for their own sense of home. This is Unpolished Wisdom. Until next time.